Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar. This webinar is being brought to you by Clean Energy Group, and our topic today is the need for national collaboration on distributed energy storage. And before we get started, I'd like to go over a quick housekeeping slide. All of our participants today are in listen-only mode. This means that you can hear us, but we can't hear you. And you can connect to the audio portion of this webinar in a few ways. You can use your telephone or your computer's mic and speakers. There are some instructions on the screen. Another note, we ask that all of our participants today please submit your questions throughout the broadcast by typing them into the questions box on your webinar console and hit the send button. Please type your questions in as you think of them and don't wait till the end. We will be doing our Q&A at the end, but it's best if you type your questions in as you think of them. And my final note is that this webinar is being recorded. You will find this webinar recording and all of our previous webinar recordings at the web address that you see on your screen. And with that, I'd like to pass this over to Lou Milford. Lou is the president of Clean Energy Group, and he is hosting today's webinar. Lou, please go ahead.
Thanks, Sam, and thanks for everybody who's joined us, and it looks like people are clocking in as we speak. The purpose of this webinar today is to kind of address one question, and that is whether we all meaning NGOs, policymakers, industry, can do more to accelerate the adoption of energy storage technologies, particularly distributed energy storage. And that was sort of the purpose of the paper that prompted this webinar that you'll see linked in the materials. And the paper was sort of tentatively tried to answer the question and say, yes, we can do more, and suggested some things that could be done. But we think that we would like to know more from the folks who are on this webinar and others to get a sense of whether these kinds of directions make sense. So just as a quick background, Clean Energy Group is a national nonprofit. We work on, as the name implies, clean energy, renewable technology markets, and tech finance and innovation issues around the country, chiefly at the state and local level. And we focus on the generation side. We also created a separate organization called Clean Energy States Alliance that we manage. And CESA is also a nonprofit that is an association of public entities that manage most of the major clean energy support programs around the country. So we have our finger on the pulse of what we think is happening around the country in clean energy and more recently in storage. So one other project that we work on is an energy storage project for Department of Energy through Sandia National Labs. And that's a project where we work with our state counterparts and DOE and Sandia to help create and support projects around the country. So in advance of that, we do a series of webinars as we have done here, conferences, papers, and surveys and the like. We think it's actually been a very successful partnership. The folks at DOE and Sandia are very good people to work with, Imre and others. We think that kind of partnership is really one way to help advance this market as well. One of our important projects that relates to storage is the Resilient Power project, which is focused on an aspect of what we think storage can do, and that is helping critical facilities ride out power outages and provide other services such as resilient power and perhaps bill reduction. And we've seen, obviously, the need for that kind of work after Katrina and certainly after Sandy, and we've seen a great deal of more state support for these resilient power programs in places like New Jersey and Connecticut and Massachusetts and New York, where we have dedicated hundreds of millions of dollars of new money beginning to support distributed solar and storage and other kinds of hybrid technology solutions to address those kinds of difficulties. And we're also beginning to engage city officials to develop these kinds of programs around the country. And we also have an interest and a focus on low-income and affordable housing and community facilities that were hit dramatically by outages like Sandy. And we think that there's an interesting opportunity to kind of bend the arc of what is emerging as an energy storage marketplace and bend that technology for public needs as well. I mean, we see a dramatic increase in the use of storage technologies for demand charge reduction, for use of ancillary services to serve commercial industrial customers, and that's a terrific market trend. We'd like to see those kinds of activities directed also to public and other critical facilities where there are people in need of those services and those kinds of systems. So we think this is just a tremendous opportunity to move this market in the way that can serve multiple end users, and we've done a fair amount of writing on this. So next and last slide for me. So the paper that we wrote and that others will talk about and will relate to is whether we can do more. And the paper really was an effort to solicit interest and reactions. It certainly wasn't conclusive by any means. And the question is whether we can build on the great work that Katherine Hamilton and others have done around energy storage policy and broaden that collaboration to NGOs, industry, government policymakers. And so that's really the point of this webinar. It's sort of the beginning of a conversation, we hope, around that kind of expanded effort, what the scope should be, what benefits could be, and then how to support it, structure it, and perhaps actually make it happen. So with that, I'm going to stop, and I'm going to turn it over to Katherine Hamilton, who is the Policy Director for the Energy Storage Association. I'm sure many of you who are on the webinar today know Katherine's work. She's also a principal at 38 North Solutions. She's been with Gridwise Alliance, and prior to that, Good Energies, and also NREL, very long and distinguished record in this area, and she's been doing some terrific work. So let me turn it over to Katherine, and then I'll introduce Seth, our program associate, when Katherine is finished. So thanks again, and I'll turn it over to Katherine. She's not. I just got an email from her that she's not muted, so something is up. Okay. Well, as we'll get to Katherine, I'm sure, in a second. Let me turn to Seth Mullendar, who's a program associate with Clean Energy Group, and he's working with us on the Resilient Power project. And prior to coming here, we're lucky to have him. Seth was with the Union of Concerned Scientists, and previously just received a master's in civil and environmental engineering from Stanford. So we're really glad to have him, and he'll talk about the paper and some of the aspects of the paper, and then we'll turn to Katherine when we figure out what our glitch is.
All right, thanks, Lou. Yeah, and I'm sure we'll have Katherine back shortly. I'm just going to get on here for a little bit just to talk about the paper that we put out and kind of set up the case for why we think national collaboration is needed on energy storage, and give you a few details on that. So the first question is, well, why energy storage? I know Katherine's going to go over this as well, but I'll give you a quick overview here. Basically, energy storage is the key to the energy transformation that's taking place all across the country and across the world. It's the key to grid modernization and also to incorporating higher levels of renewable integration. Energy storage can provide a number of valuable grid services, from frequency regulation, demand response, and it reduces the need for expensive peaker plants by being able to reduce peak load at times when the grid is overly congested. Also can either delay or even remove the need for expensive transmission and delivery upgrades in areas where the grid is congested and overloaded. Another thing that energy storage does is it adds a lot of resiliency to the power system. In addition to flexibility, energy storage allows pieces of the grid to keep functioning even if the overall centralized grid is down, so that individual companies or communities, anywhere where energy storage is hooked up and able to provide power to critical loads, can keep them running in the face of natural disasters or other outages. The other thing that's happening with energy storage is costs are coming down really fast. You can see this particularly in lithium-ion batteries. The trend has been really rapid decrease in the cost of lithium-ion batteries, and that's the demand for new and advanced batteries in transportation sector has really been advancing those technologies fast. And all trends point to this continuing, at least in the foreseeable future. We're not going to really go into how energy storage works or any of the details on that front, but Clean Energy Group also released a report recently called Solar 101, Solar and Storage 101. And this is kind of a basic primer for people that want to learn more about how the system works and how you can benefit from solar and storage. You can find that on our website. The link is here. We'll have all these slides up online later on. So the next step is, well, energy storage. If it's so great, well, why do we need policy intervention? Well, there's a number of reasons why. One of the most important things is that the value streams for the benefits of energy storage are fragmented amongst a number of different parties, whether that's utilities, grid operators, or system owners. It's difficult for any one of these entities to fully monetize the benefits that energy storage can provide. So projects that get done, it's difficult for anybody to realize the full benefits and make these economic. It can also be challenging to finance projects. Energy storage still is a bit untested, unlike solar, and it can be an unwelcome proposition for many investors. And there's no widespread financing model that's been developed in the U.S. for energy storage. Additionally, it's still just kind of a new technology. And this makes it difficult for developers to sometimes overcome the initial cost barrier. So incentives might need to take place there or be developed. And like I said, it's an emerging technology. There are a lot of different companies doing a lot of different things. There are different kinds of batteries, different kinds of chemistries, and a lot of these are very unfamiliar to developers. They just don't know what's out there or how it works. The other problem is that because these are pretty new, the standard permitting standards and regulations haven't really been developed. And this is causing a lot of expensive delays in projects. These standards and permitting need to be simplified and standardized so that when a project is proposed, it doesn't take a long time to get things done. So, because we need policy intervention, we are proposing a national energy storage network. Part of the reason is because energy storage is happening whether or not there's good policy and regulations set into place. According to Green Tech Media Research, the solar and storage market in the U.S. is going to be $1 billion market by 2018. That's a lot of growth, and it's going to happen. Without a network, that might not happen in the most optimal and cost-effective way. There's also a lot of different development strategies occurring across the country. Most people know California as a leader with their 1.3 gigawatt energy storage mandate. They also have a self-generation incentive program that's getting a lot of projects done. In New York, there's a very progressive Con Edison demand reduction program that's going on there that's starting to get projects done. New Jersey has a big fund for clean energy, and they've done a energy storage only solicitation where they're getting a number of projects done in municipalities around the state. And Hawaii faces a different problem with the high levels of solar that they have. Storage is becoming an answer to over-generation at some times due to the high levels of solar penetration. So Hawaii has to deal with this and has to start looking at energy storage as a solution. One of the problems with these strategies, though, is that they don't tend to support smaller projects. Most of them are primarily supporting big grid-scale projects or major microgrids. We at Clean Energy Group particularly see and are promoting the value of smaller distributed behind-the-meter systems that can be located at the customer site. One of the benefits of this is these smaller systems can be located pretty much anywhere. That's particularly important in places like New York, where it's a dense population and it's expensive to use property, and space is at a premium. So these smaller systems can be put pretty much anywhere. Also, not just big industries and utilities benefit from these small systems. It's smaller companies and communities that can start to see the benefits and realize some of the revenue streams from energy storage. In addition, these smaller systems provide direct resilient power for critical facilities or companies or anybody who's connected to them, and creates a more decentralized grid and power system, which is where we seem to be headed. And you know, in New York, it's another thing. Their revisioning their energy system is looking at becoming more decentralized, and that's happening in other areas around the U.S. as well. So with all this, there's a lot of little projects, but no clear concerted agenda for energy storage on a federal level. We're really seeing support in a similar place as to where solar was about 15 years ago, where most of the projects that are getting done are one-off projects and innovative pilot projects, but they're dealt with on a case-by-case basis. And we're not seeing a big standardization and a real roadmap forward. So that is where a network comes in. One of the big things that a network can do is develop this roadmap for energy storage development, provide a path for people to say, okay, this is the way we can do this, and this is how we get there. This sort of collaboration and free exchange of ideas that a network can provide can help accelerate both the efficiency and just the speed of deployment for energy storage, and lead to the adoption of best practices sooner than if it's a disjointed effort. So a big part of this is supporting and sharing the results of innovative projects. That can be policies or technology exchange, just the exchange of information. Also, of course, encouraging financial innovation, as well as restructuring of market conditions to incentivize the use of storage and maximize the benefits. And, of course, policy support where these other mechanisms may not be able to make the adjustments necessary in the short term. And as I said before, one of the things we're seeing a lot with the projects that we've been working with is that regulations and permitting can cause a lot of headaches and can make projects take longer to implement and cause cost considerations that shouldn't be there, just because there are no standardizations, and each municipality, each city deals with energy storage in different ways. There are different fire codes and different permits, and it's just slowing down the projects and making them more expensive than they need to be. Lastly, just need to increase the availability and access to information. Need to make sure that everybody's getting the information. So we want to make this a partnership between not just big industry groups, but nonprofits, policymakers, developers. Anyone that could benefit from energy storage needs to be able to have this information easily available, whether that's through webinars like this or newsletters, or just having a website that people can access information. So with that, I'm going to see if we can turn this back to Katherine. How's that looking?
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yay! I'm so happy. Okay. Sorry, it was like the silent scream from me where I really was talking. It was great to hear Seth first, actually, to hear what he had to say. Now it teed me up a little bit. So I'm going to kind of go back a little bit, talk about with the Energy Storage Association, who we are and what we're working on, so you can get some perspective of what we've been doing on the policy front and kind of see where those gaps are, so that we can kind of work toward collaboration. You all probably know exactly what energy storage is, but to let you know, ESA does represent advanced energy storage technologies across the grid. So while we do work on distributed energy storage, we also work, and distributed energy storage behind the meter, I should say, we also work on the distribution side, substation side, microgrid type, and then certainly utility scale and transmission side. So we work on all different types of chemistries. We're completely neutral as to what the technology is. We don't work as much on pumped hydro because the National Hydropower Association covers those issues, but we certainly work collaboratively with them on a lot of policies. Okay, our members, just to give you a snapshot, there are about 150 members, and they're everything from small startup innovative companies to large project developers to folks like S&C Electric who are working on all of the equipment that connects everything together. So it's a really large ecosystem with a lot of different types of players, as you can see. The trajectory of the industry, according to IHS, is that, and you've probably seen many stories that say the same thing, that the growth will explode from 0.34 gigawatts from 2012 and 2013 to 6 gigawatts by 2017 and over 40 gigawatts by 2022. This is an industry to watch because certainly it's as you'll see, there are a lot of good high values to energy storage, and so the growth is pretty enormous. And Seth did mention this Green Tech Media report called the Energy Storage Monitor. And a couple of things to note. 2015 is expected to be the biggest year, but I don't think that's going to be the biggest year forever. It's just going to be the biggest year yet. I think every year is going to be the biggest year yet for a while to come. 90% of the deployments were in front of the meter, only 10% behind, and you'll see that a lot of that is because of policy. 70% were lithium-ion batteries, but we see a lot of other chemistries and other types of batteries that are coming into play, and those will continue to grow. But the key here is that the vast majority of the deployments are taking place in a small number of markets because of the right policy and regulatory drivers and the design of the market. And that is really important because that is what's driving deployment. This is just a snapshot of some of the storage projects in the pipeline. There are a variety in a variety of areas. You can find on energystorage.exchange.org a list of projects. You can search on there by state or region, and you can dig down into what that project really is. That's been a really helpful resource. Regional hubs, just to give you a snapshot, this is by market. You'll see here that PJM is the biggest, and there's a reason for that. It's because policy was implemented faster and more effectively than other markets. Cal ISO is second, and part of that is because of what California is doing, and then you'll see the other market hubs. These are going to change and grow, and some may end up being more than others eventually, but certainly PJM has had the biggest market growth. Okay, here is the problem statement, is that according to EIA, we're going to need 40 gigawatts of peak generation in the next 15 years. And if you think about where that peak generation is going to come, coupled with the need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions with the EPA Clean Power Plan, we're in a place where we're going to need to find alternative resources to meet those peaks. So I'm going to go through just some of the values that we think of on energy storage, because the key to making the cost coming down on energy storage and scale deployment is the ability to value all of these different streams appropriately and be compensated for those values. So here's one value, which is energy storage for peak shaving, being able to charge at lower off-peak heat rates, and then being able to discharge during peak times, then lowering the cost for other generations. Another value, and this is really key, this is something we're working on really hard with FERC and with states, is energy storage as a flexible resource. So if you look at a typical gas peaker plant, say 50 megawatt unit, the flexible range is only output, and it's, say, 40 megawatts at its capacity factor. So the flexible range really is only 40 megawatts, it's only output. Whereas with storage, you have a flexible range at the same nameplate capacity of 100 megawatts, and that's because it can both absorb and eject into the grid. So sometimes absorbing energy is just as important as injecting energy into the grid. So, for example, say you have a wind project that is producing wind at a time that's off-peak. If a battery is being charged at that time, the battery can absorb that and then discharge it at a time when it's needed more. So we see flexible resource as a key benefit and a key value of energy storage. Here's another value that we find particularly interesting in the context of the Clean Power Plan. This is a company, Alevo, that is building a manufacturing facility in an old cigarette plant in North Carolina. Their product is being paired with coal plants, existing coal plants, that can help them ramp, help provide some ability to do ancillary services. It increases their output, increases their efficiency, and decreases their greenhouse gas reduction. So we feel like this is another way in which you can deploy energy storage in a way that helps existing generators. Of course, another value is energy storage for renewable energy integration, so making sure that we can integrate smoothly. This is a project in Hawaii. We do not lead with, we want energy storage so that renewable energy can get on the grid. That's really not how we lead. We lead with, look, it's good for everything on the grid, and it helps the grid function better. So the most elegant solution is to have the energy storage on the grid, helping whatever's on there that needs help. Here's another value. This is a project in the UK with S&C Electric, and this was energy storage that was used for transmission and distribution deferral. It's also being used for transmission capacity relief, frequency regulation, and spinning reserve. It's multiple use, and this is, of course, one of the nuts that we need to crack is being able to be compensated for all those different multiple value streams. That's going to be really important to be able to drive down the cost and enhance the benefits. Here's another project. This is a SAS project. It's a microgrid. It increases efficiency at the facility and reliability, certainly. Seth mentioned, and Lou as well, that there's a really strong push toward more resilient grid structures, and this is one way we can help. This is another project. And I'm sorry, these are all pictures of boxes. It's just because that's what storage looks like. It's battery cells in a box for the most part. So here's another project, which is a community energy storage project, and essentially it would be next to a transformer, which also looks like a green box, and you have part of the power electronics, and then you have battery cells underground. But what this would do is in a neighborhood provide some peak shaving in a neighborhood, reliability, allow you to ride through some outages, and also provide just basic voltage support to the utility. So this is on the distribution side, but not behind the meter. And then, of course, behind the meter, you can look at certainly commercial and industrial applications. This happens to be a picture of a residential application, and this is supporting rooftop solar. So these are all the values, and there's certainly more. Now, the issue is then how do you not only allow compensation for the values, but how also do you drive down the cost? And this is just an illustrative trajectory from Rocky Mountain Institute. This is not dissimilar from the way we've seen solar come down. So you'll see in this illustration that the balance of system cost is what is the biggest chunk. The lithium-ion cells in this particular example are not the biggest chunk of the cost, and this is the same with solar, where the balance of system and all the soft costs we've needed to bring those down as solar panel costs have come down. So similar is storage and bringing down the balance of system cost. Bloomberg Energy for Now certainly shows that the cell cost is going to be coming down, and we would expect the balance of system cost to come down as well. And just there are a lot of different decline predictions. Navigant has a study, Encore, Morgan Stanley, and Tesla certainly have studies, and it sort of depends on what you count in that, what you count as the time of the battery, whether it's kilowatt hours or kilowatt. But certainly everybody's predicting that the cost will come down. So the Brattle Group did a study for Encore at the Texas market, and their big finding was, like, given the benefits that storage can bring, and there are a wide variety of benefits that I went through, enabling the cost-effective investments in storage will require a regulatory framework, and Seth brought this up as well. It will require a regulatory framework that allows investors to capture the wholesale market value, the transmission and distribution system values, and then all of the other values together. And so what we need to do here, the trick is to come up with that regulatory construct to do that. So I spend a lot of my time working on policy. So we have sort of 4 main levers to policy, and I'll go through each of these, what we're doing and some of the successes we've had, but then at the end we'll talk through what are the opportunities left for us, and then how we can kind of work together on that. So Congress is one. I know in the past Congress hasn't been as, I don't know what you would say, assertive on passing legislation. I think there are a lot of opportunities now, and I'll talk through some of what those could be. Then federal and state agencies we work with, state regulators and legislators, and then FERC and the system operators as well. So I'll go through each of these and talk a little bit about what we're doing. So on Congress, we've spent several years just doing basic education. 3 years ago, I would say I would walk into a staff in Congress and say energy storage, and they would have absolutely no idea what I was talking about. So in a way, that's good because it gives you this great opportunity to do basic education. So we've done lots of briefings. They're always completely packed. Over the last couple of years, I think we've had 6 or 8 briefings and really brought people up to speed to say, all right, this is not rocket science. This is something you need to know about. This is something you need to consider as a real resource out there. And all of the reaction so far has been really, really positive. Nobody says, that sounds like a really bad idea. It sounds like a good idea for everybody. So we've had really good luck on education. Now, there has been an investment tax credit that has been offered 3 sessions in a row. Senator Wyden, I believe, is going to reintroduce it. It's called the Storage Act. It basically mimics the solar tax credit on a grid scale, on-site sort of third-party financing model, and then also behind the meter. And when that comes out, we'll certainly send out a link to Lou and his folks to let you know. But I think it's going to come up pretty soon. They are doing supposedly doing tax reform this year in the Senate, so we've been following that, certainly giving a lot of input to tax staff, and we hope that the Storage Act and some piece on storage will be included. In addition, opening up master limited partnerships to include energy storage, it happened in the last couple of Congresses, and we're going to, if they have that bill again. Currently, only the fossil industry can take advantage of master limited partnerships, so opening that up to renewables and energy storage is important. We've worked on that. We were able to get it in last time, and we would assume we would be in again. We'll see again how tax reform works out if MLPs are even part of that. R&D tax treatment, the R&D tax credit is not being taken advantage of by companies, startups like some of the energy storage companies, because pre-revenue companies can't take advantage of it. So trying to tweak the tax code to allow some of those companies to form partnership structures and be able to take advantage of an R&D tax credit would be really important. And then finally, energy resilience and infrastructure policy. There will be energy bills in the Senate and House. They're working on them right now. They're going to try to focus sort of EPACT and EISA light bills, and I say light because there's going to be less that they can really come together on, I would think, but they are very serious on both sides of the aisle about working together to try to come up with something they can agree on. We think they can agree on storage. Storage can be considered infrastructure. It can be considered part of energy efficiency. It has a lot of ways that that suit the messaging of both sides of the aisle. So I think we're making some ground on that, and I think if there is an energy storage bill, and if there is an energy bill, then energy storage will be part of it. Another thing that will play into this is Department of Energy is about to issue their quadrennial energy review, which is going to have policy recommendations for transmission, distribution, and storage infrastructure. So we expect that to have a pretty good section on energy storage as well. So I think the Senate and House are going to be looking at the QER to see what they can adopt in their energy bills and put forward. And so we're working very closely with Department of Energy and the White House and both sides of the hill on that. This is just an example of success. So if we were to get an investment tax credit, this is what KEMA and the Copper Development Association together did a study in 2012 that shows the impact on the market for a tax credit. And this, certainly you've seen this happen in the solar and wind industry, is that if you have a tax credit, you have a lot more investment flowing in. And one of the big points I want to make is that to really have investors be interested in storage, they need to know that there's a market and that there's certainty and that there will be a return for them. And so part of that puzzle piece is making sure that the policies are in place to allow for certainty of market. So on the federal and state agencies, we've certainly, as I said, we reached out to the Department of Energy on the quadrennial energy review. We've also been working with the Office of Electricity, reached out to the Department of Commerce on trying to get folks to be able to, in the trade office, U.S. energy storage companies have them get interest overseas, State Department in the same way. General Services Administration and Department of Defense are kind of the folks that are the building owners and managers of all of our federal facilities, and they're all very interested for different reasons in energy storage. Department of Defense certainly for some of their hardening, energy security, and resilience reasons. And then EPA is another huge player with their Clean Power Plan and the state implementation plans on making sure that energy storage is included in all of those. So just to talk about that for a second, we recommended in our comments to EPA that energy storage, which was only briefly mentioned in building block number 4, which is demand-side technologies. It was briefly mentioned, but really we want to make sure that it is able to participate in every single building block of the Clean Power Plan. We've made some pretty strong, compelling cases and given examples of how technologies can do that. So we're hopeful in the final rule that you'll see energy storage through the Clean Power Plan in a much bigger way. And certainly as states start implementing, and with the Clean Energy Group and your Clean Energy States Alliance, I think that's a good place to focus on storage is in those implementation plans. An example of success on the state side is if California has been really a leader on storage. They have a 1.3 gigawatt target. I would say it's more like a mandate for storage. Now that's kind of the way California works. They have a target for greenhouse gas reductions. They have a target for renewable deployment. So that's sort of the way that state works, and storage fits really well into what they're doing. The issue in California is that there are all these different cross-cutting agencies. So there's the California Energy Commission, there's the California Public Utility Commission, and then certainly the ISO is out there as well. Those 3 groups got together to come up with a roadmap, and it got a lot of stakeholder input. We certainly had input into the process. But they kind of said there are 3 real things we need to do, and I don't think it's limited to California, which is to increase revenue opportunities consistent with all those different value streams that I talked about, to reduce the cost of interconnection, integration, and operations, all that sort of balance of system costs, and then to streamline policies and processes to really give certainty to the industry and to investors in the industry. So in the California procurement, the requirement was 1.3 gigawatts by 2022. And the 3 major investor-owned utilities, SoCalEd, Pacific Gas and Electric, and San Diego, all had different requirements. SoCalEd, even before that mandate came out, was mandated to purchase 50 megawatts of energy storage for the LA Basin. And when they put out their request for offer, they ended up awarding 260 megawatts of storage. And that was because it was cost effective and it did what they needed for it to do, which was to provide flexible capacity. And this 260 megawatts is behind the meter, it's distribution scale, and it's also utility scale. So it's all across the grid, but showing SoCalEd's ability to do this has really made an enormous difference. And it changes the conversation, I believe, for the other 2 utilities as well. So if we look at some other state examples, and there are lots of states that are looking at storage, these are just a few examples that are looking at it for different reasons. We are a party to the New York REV, the Reforming the Energy Vision. Energy storage does have a place in the REV. It's really one of the few things that the utility is allowed to own. There are a lot of other solutions that the utility it really needs to create more of a competitive market around. Energy storage was one exception. So we have to kind of see what that means for New York and how that means various energy storage technologies and applications can participate. In Arizona, there was a settlement that the consumer advocate came up with Arizona Public Service, and we think it will be with other utilities as well, which when they're doing peaker capacity planning to really do an open RFP and allow a lot of flexible resources to compete. So that would be demand response, energy efficiency, renewables, and energy storage. And let everybody compete for that flexible capacity, that peak capacity, and see who's really able to produce that. And we think energy storage can have a huge place in that. So Arizona is a place to watch. Hawaii, certainly they're changing the tires while the car is moving, and they are doing a lot of renewables integration with storage. They need to switch over to renewables, but it's been difficult for the grid operator there to be able to accommodate a lot of the interconnection needs and keep their grid stable, so energy storage is really important there. And then in Texas, looking at all the potential for multiple uses, as I said in that Brattle Group report with Encore, trying to capture all the different uses. A key market is FERC and the ISOs. So we've had enormous success with FERC. Order 755 was really the first out of the gate, which is pay for performance for speed and accuracy for providing frequency regulation. Energy storage can do things that nothing else can do. And those things actually provide services that mean something to the grid. And the key is to be able to say, what do those services mean? What is the value? And then how do we monetize that? So Order 755 said to ISOs, you need to come up with a way to reward speed and accuracy that other resources cannot provide. It didn't limit it to energy storage. Anybody, if you can provide these resources, you can get paid for them. It just turns out that energy storage is particularly suited for that. Other orders that we've had huge success with and influence on were Order 784, which was for third-party services and accounting for storage. Order 792 was to allow for small generation fast-track interconnection for storage. Order 794, we have been involved in on frequency response. That is still in, there's a NOPR now that I think the deadline is April 27th for frequency response that we've been participating in to show that energy storage can provide those services. And then certainly Order 1000 that's been out there for a while to provide non-transmission alternatives, and we think that flexible resources like energy storage should be able to participate. We continue to have great relationships and build on those with all of the commissioners and the chairman that's now Chairman Bay. It's flipped over from Chairman Cheryl Wolf-Lur, and every single commissioner at FERC has been very positive on energy storage. So that's really good. It means they listen to us, they count on us, and they count on, ESA, but I think others who are working on energy storage to provide them good resources on what we've learned in the field, what's really been successful, and the more data, the better. We're continuing to try to remove some of those market barriers and to try to define some new products. One of the products we would like to create is a flexible capacity product. So we just need to show that it's a service that should be monetized, that is either not allowing energy storage to be part of the market or that is presenting a barrier to entry to the market. And if companies can prove that out, then we can start a proceeding at FERC. So this is just an example of the success of pay for performance, which shows that when FERC 755 was implemented in October of 2012, that the market just started to grow exponentially. And you'll see when I showed you that energy storage hub chart, you saw that PJM was the biggest. So PJM was the first to implement pay for performance and in a way that works really well. And so that's been the strongest market so far. This is another way, flexible ramping, as I mentioned, flexible capacity, flexible ramping resources, trying to create some products, some market products that allow energy storage and other facilities to be able to get paid for what they're doing and for what they're able to do. It's going to be really important. It's going to really help the grid. So here's what we still need to work on. These are all opportunities. I don't know if you want to say barriers, but I consider them opportunities. We need to make sure that energy storage, as any other resource, is considered a real energy resource. We want to make sure it's included in the utility planning processes, in every utility process, especially when they do integrated resource planning. Often it's not done but every few years, and we want to be able to get in on the front end of that and make sure it's built in. Making sure we have strong interconnection and safety standards so everybody knows what rules we're operating under, because that is a huge cost if different utilities, different people are doing different things. And this is always tricky with local, municipal, state governments having different standards. Making sure we have state and federal incentive programs the way other industries have had and other innovations have had, is trying to build in incentives. I think that will really help. Another really important issue, and I think that's especially important for distribution scale, is settlement rules. And we're right now in the middle of a big FERC issue of energy storage on the distribution side that was being charged wholesale distribution rates, while it's actually being charged as a distribution load while it's providing wholesale services. And buying at retail and selling at wholesale is not a great business model. So we're trying to prevent that from going forward. FERC we believe is going to do a rehearing. We're still waiting to hear about that. But making sure that there are good settlement rules so that when you're doing storage, if it's behind the meter or on the distribution grid, say at the substation level, making sure that that storage is not being pinged as a load, because when your battery is charging or when any kind of energy storage is charging, it is actually providing a service to the grid, as I had mentioned before on the flexible services. So letting energy storage charge without being hit as a load is going to be really, really important. So we need to make sure that those rules are in place, that we have some really good models for those rules. And then coming up with rates and accounting. So does net energy metering work? What are some things that might work for storage? Are there time of use rates? Are there other kind of rate structures? Is there a value of solar that could work for value of storage? So trying to come up with different accounting processes and different rates is going to be really important. As I mentioned before, getting ISO markets open and new products, having access to markets. And then finally, I just would say an overarching statement is trying to get storage on the menu. So by that, I mean just making sure that it's embedded in everything we do. Some of you may have heard me say this. I consider energy storage is good for everything. It just makes everything better, kind of like bacon. So I like to think of it as bacon for the grid. Now, energy storage, natural allies. We should have a lot of allies. So the renewable folks, we've certainly had a lot. We found allies with the solar industry and with hydro, because certainly they have, pump storage. Clean energy and environmental organizations. I think, we should all be allies, but a lot of the groups don't really understand enough about energy storage and the values to be able to talk about it at the same time they're talking about other clean energy. Startup industries. We're working cross-sector on that R&D tax credit I mentioned, and startup industries that are able to, if it's biotech or medtech, all of these are startups. So maybe together we can work on policies that help startups. Innovation and manufacturing groups, certainly Department of Defense and states that have resilience and security needs we can work with. Utilities and ISOs can be our allies. Consumer advocates in Arizona, the consumer advocate was our greatest ally. And then with states, we think states are really important allies, whether it's on the regulatory side or the administrative side of states. With the state energy offices, we think this is all really, really important. So I'm sorry I tended to go on a little long, and I apologize for the hiccup with me being muted, but I'm absolutely open to taking any questions you have, Lou.
Catherine, that's great. As you all can see, the industry is really well represented, and there's a lot of work that's already happening and a lot to do. If anyone has additional questions, we have some, and so let me start with a few that have come in. Catherine, I think you kind of addressed this, but this is a cost question, and it basically was a gentleman who said, the rule of thumb a while ago was sort of like $1 million a megawatt for utility scale. Kind of where are the costs aligning today for smaller systems? Where do you see that today?
Yeah, I mean, I think it totally depends on where you are and what the project is. So it's very hard for us to get those costs because when contracts are negotiated, that information isn't always available. But certainly it's come down significantly, and I had a slide that different groups are saying different things about how much the cost is, how much the costs are coming down. So for example, Tesla's unit is going to be really cheap. I think they're saying it's certainly manageable for a customer. They're saying their battery cost is $110 a kilowatt hour. So I think that's the battery only cost. But I think definitely depends on what the price of electricity is in a given place and what the utility is asking the battery to do. I think what you don't want to be stuck with is having to do a project that the battery is only serving one purpose. So if you were just doing it as backup power, that may not be the most cost-effective solution. Instead, you'd want it to be able to provide grid services at the same time and be able to monetize those.
Yes.
So I'm sorry, that was a roundabout answer, but it really does vary.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great answer. Seth, do you want to add in on anything on cost at a sort of a smaller scale distributed level?
I mean, we got some cost projections on a number of projects were just implemented in New Jersey. I think They have 13 different projects that they're doing, and the costs tended to be in around the $1,000 per kilowatt range, 1,000 to 1,500, somewhere around there. So it's really, I think one of the things they took away from theirs is that small projects and big projects tended to have about the same cost for the battery, so it didn't really matter the scalability.
And what we're seeing, I think, as Seth said, and Katherine saying the same thing, it is very site-specific and locational, but costs really have to be looked at in terms of revenue streams and other applications, and it's very important to see both sides of that. Another question came up, and maybe Seth, you could address this, is sort of the role of storage in community planning, critical local facilities, sheltering in place. We're doing a lot of work in this area, but you may want to touch on a bit of this. One thing I want to say up front in an answer to that is on our site, we did do a nice paper on Baltimore and the way that a city could begin to integrate solar and storage in critical facilities. So if that person or others are interested in the intersection of community planning and solar storage, take a look at that. But Seth, if you want to add some stuff to that.
Yeah, sure. And we also had the report just about city planning and what they can do for more resiliency as well. That is what we've been dealing with, and we're looking at facilities that tend to have smaller loads that can be well served by these small behind-the-meter systems. And a lot of them are finding that it is cost-effective if they happen to be in the PJM territory, where they can play in the frequency regulation markets. Also, we're seeing success with systems that are doing big demand reductions in demand reduction charge drops. That these systems are having short payback periods. So I think the thing is, it's just, again, it's really site-specific, but we've seen a lot of interest from cities doing this and a lot of good fits for projects. I think we're going to see more of that going forward.
Great. There's another question about general life expectancy of batteries. That's sort of a broad question, and specifically how municipalities that might plan for these projects need to think about replacement costs. I'll leave you, either one may want to jump in on that. I think it may depend to some extent, obviously, on whether these systems are leased financed, whether it's done under a power purchase agreement, or whether it's ownership. All of that might determine some of the replacement cost issues, but maybe if Katherine or Seth, if you want to jump into that question.
Yeah, I think most people are talking about between 10 and 20 years. It kind of depends on what the technology is, what the chemistry is, and what it's doing and how it's being used. So there's a battery in Alaska that's been operating for 10 years on the grid, and it's doing fine. I think, I think some of these technologies haven't been out there long enough to know if they've got the 20 years, but I think that's what between 10 and 20 is what people are planning on. Seth, I don't know if you've heard something different.
Yeah, when we've dealt with companies that they'll retain ownership of the battery or some sort of leasing program, it tends to be a 10-year warranty. And again, yeah, I think a lot of it remains to be seen what will actually happen. But they're insuring 10 years, and this is for frequency regulation markets where the batteries are actually getting used a lot and on the community municipal level. So I think 10 years is a good ballpark, but it really does depend.
Great, thank you. Katherine, this may be more for you. It's a question about manufacturers and sharing information in some kind of a collaborative framework. The question is, are there ways to incentivize the sharing of what might be trade secrets or proprietary information in order to encourage more parallel research paths, accelerate solutions to problems? Is that something that you have any thoughts on?
It hasn't come up from where I sit because I work so much on policy, so that hasn't come up. I mean, you could look at the Tesla model of opening up all the patents. I don't know if everybody's going to be willing to do that. I mean, it seems like it would be a great idea, but I don't know. Manufacturers have to try to sell products, so I'm not really sure how that would play out.
Yep. Okay. There's also a question, Seth, this may be yours because this has come up a number of times in our other webinars, and that is sort of the backup requirements for critical facilities tend to be 24 hours or 48 hours. Can batteries do the job for longer-term backup? And I think we've actually just been looking at some data for some options like this.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Yes, it can. But you got to really plan out the size of the battery versus what critical loads are going to be backed up. Is it usually cost effective to back up all your loads for a building for 24 hours or more with a battery? Not at this time, not usually. But if you have a few loads that you need to weather through a storm and make sure your facility stays operational, you keep the lights on, you keep people's cell phones charged, definitely, batteries can do that, especially when they're tied in with solar. And get some recharging during the day. Essentially, you can go indefinitely with that setup.
Yeah, and there are different chemistries that do different things. So flow batteries are sort of for longer duration. And the issue is, as you say, what's the highest value that you need? Now, in most instances, the highest value isn't 24-hour backup. It's like those 15 minutes here and there that are the most expensive times of day to operate. So, you have to kind of build to what's going to be the highest value for whatever you need. And so there are chemistries. If you say, I need X number of hours for X number of days, you can build to that. It just may not be the highest value for the product.
Great. Now, I think we've gone through most of the questions, and it looks like we've kind of tapped out at the end of our time, so I want to try to close this down, but just give Katherine and Seth any other final comments, maybe particularly around kind of the concept of further collaboration going forward to try to address these and other issues.
I mean, I'm really excited that we were able to do this and have this conversation. I think it's really important that we all work together because it's, one group can't do it all. I think it's something we want to have as part of our solution mix, and there are just a lot of people that can help put that into place. And there are a lot of different experiences out there, so you all have different experiences with different locales and states. And if we're all moving forward in the same direction, I think we can get a lot more done.
Yeah, I think I just want to echo that. We're two different groups. The Energy Storage Association deals a lot with industry groups and large systems, and Clean Energy Group, we're working with a lot of little municipalities and just individual developers, and it's going to take both to get this done. And so I think it's a great start. We're going to get more people involved.
Thank you, folks. I'll leave it to Sam. You want to close up?
All right, so you can find us online at the web address you see on our screen. We have a Facebook page. We have a Twitter page. There is contact info on your screen as well if you'd like to contact our hosts today. And thank you again.